most important part of finding your lion heart is when you drop down and mama your trauma. In your belly and in your whole body. What is really going on when you drop down into your primal feelings and let them control your whole body, this is the finish of the emotional release, and you then can hold space for your emotions. It's at the end. The holding space and mama your trauma, along with celebrating your victory, is the end of this flight and flight, freeze, or fawn response. For many, they are stuck always in the fight or flight, freeze, or fawn. And this creates havoc with our autonomic immune system and our nervous system. And then when you're finished ranting and raving and frothing at the mouth, whatever it is you have to do to pull your power back and be in control. You shouldn't hurt me, it wasn't right, all those kind of things. Then with this big massive fear and the big massive anger, you can go down and actually embrace your own deepest pain. Whatever that deep pain is that you have, whether it's neglect or being judged or being abused, whatever it is, you go down there and feel it, and feel the grief, the sadness, whatever it is, you cry it out, you moan it out. And you, as the actor, as the one in control, embrace that, yeah? Now, once you're in there, once you're in your pain, the whole point is to get into your pain. Once you're in there, and you remember you're a much bigger person now because you have this great energy that you've built up. So you can embrace this pain because it's not bigger than you. You are now bigger than it. That's the point of the exercise, to become bigger than your pain. You embrace it and you feel it. Then you can feel into yourself and you feel into that person. If it was your parents, you can look at their pain, right? There's your pain, but in your pain is their pain. Okay? And this is kind of an important step, because as you heal your pain, as you embrace your pain, you have to pretty much embrace theirs, because yours mirrors theirs. So when you change your reflection, you'll change their reflection. So it's important to feel all the pain that exists within your pain, nested inside your pain. This is what holding space looks like, and what it sounds like too. You are both the child and the parent. There are two parts to emotional release work. One is your will, which is represented by the baby, and the other one is you, which is represented by this father here, the ideal parent. The idea of doing emotional release work is to allow your inner child, your will, your emotional body to express fully as possible, and to allow it to express. And the ideal parent or the therapist or the best friend, which is you, allows it, observes it, accepts it, and just holds the space for the expression to happen. Our emotional wounds are the result of unexpressed, unfinished. When they're unfinished, they stay inside of us, so you end up with just sort of like a silent baby crying all the time. That's the two parts. So the idea is to have lose complete control in private, and then you'll gain complete control in public. And this is a really useful skill, life skill to have. You lose control in private, and you gain control in public. And at the same time, you're de-stressing your body, you're reconnecting to your primal self. And in this part where the baby embraces the father, that's where you mama your trauma, and you daddy your drama, and this is actually, you're seeing the birth of compassion for both the child and the father. This is the birth of compassion. And this compassion that you have for yourself, for your own emotions, is what this world needs and what you need. Because if you have compassion for yourself, then you can have compassion for others. Because people are going to go through meltdowns, and you'll go through meltdowns too in your life. On the other side of the coin, where you don't express and you have undischarged traumatic stress, what happens? Well, if the fight or flight is stuck on, you get anxiety, panic, hyperactivity, exaggerated startle, inability to relax, restlessness, hypervigilance, digestive problems, emotional flooding, chronic pain, sleeplessness, hostility, and rage. Now, if your undischarged traumatic stress is shut down, shut on off, then you got the freeze or fawn part of it, and that creates disassociation, disconnection, depression, flat affect, lethargy, deadness, exhaustion, chronic fatigue, complex syndromes, pain, low blood pressure, and there you go. And the results of all that, just one of the symptoms is anxiety, which a lot of people have, and that's what's next.
You know what anxiety feels like. We all do. Everyone experiences anxiety in some way or another. It's something that connects all of us together. Why we feel anxiety and what it really is, that may surprise you. Without anxiety, we'd all be in serious trouble. As soon as your brain senses you're in danger, a little piece of it, called the amygdala, kicks in. It gets your body ready to react. That could mean fight, run away, or shut down. It's called the fight, flight, or freeze response. This reaction goes back millions of years to our distant animal ancestors. Animals whose amygdalae were more sensitive to danger were more likely to stay alive and off the menu. Over millions of generations, this developed into the system we all know as anxiety. So you see, anxiety itself is not all bad. But when there's no immediate life or death threat, and your amygdala keeps telling your body that you're in danger, that's when anxiety becomes a problem. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference between getting eaten and public speaking or failing a test. Human society has only existed for a relatively short time. It's messy and complicated and confusing, and our amygdalae just haven't had time to catch up. So sometimes, when we're in uncomfortable situations, our brains misread the risk and overreact. Our hearts beat faster and we breathe heavily, pulling more oxygen into our bodies. The muscles in our arms and legs tense up and fill with blood. Our skin perspires to cool us down. This would all be great if we needed to fight or run, but instead, we just feel tense and sweaty. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When things trigger our anxiety, sometimes we try to avoid them, like our ancestors avoiding a predator. But that can cause problems when those triggers are important parts of life, like going to school or meeting new people, things that won't just give up and go away. So how does knowing all this help? Well, it starts with remembering what's really going on. There's nothing physically wrong with you. It's just your amygdala trying to tell you it thinks you're in danger, even if it gets confused about how much danger you're really in. Understanding why we feel anxiety is an important step in learning to manage it.
Now the health risk for undischarged traumatic stress. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention has found adverse childhood experiences as the #1 factor in almost every major disease. ACEs increase the risk for chronic illness and poor physical health. These are the diseases that they've identified as the unresolved trauma as the number one factor. Asthma, cancer, celiac disease, chronic fatigue, coronary heart disease, diabetes type 1 and type 2, fibromyalgia, hypertension, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, liver disease, lung disease, asthma, COPD, lupus, multiple sclerosis, don't know what this one is, obesity, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjögren's, sleep disorder, stroke, thyroid, Graves, thyroid homocysteine, and poor related health. This next clip shows how it works in the body, from the brain to the kidneys to the liver to the heart and then to the digestive system. All disease is because if the body has not finished its discharge and ended the fight or flight, freeze or fawn trauma response. That's how it works.
But basically, I want to talk about what's going on. So once this guy sees the car, how does he, number one, get out of the way? And then how does that affect his body? How does that affect the organs and the chemistry and all of that inside his body? And so that whole thing is called the fight or flight. And so when I ask students, how does he get out of the way of the car? The answer is always adrenaline. And the right answer is no, it's not adrenaline. Adrenaline's not going to be able to get there that quickly. And so how does the guy really get out of the way? Well, he's going to see the car coming. He's going to process that in his brain, and then he's going to send a message down his nervous system. That nervous system is going to be attached to muscles, and those muscles are going to have ATP ready to go. It's part of what's called the sympathetic nervous system, or that system inside our body that allows us to fight or flight. And so let's zoom inside this guy and talk a little bit more about how the fight or flight works. And so it's basically centered around his brain. And so in the center of his brain, near the bottom, we have something called the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus in that area of the brain is essentially going to send a signal. Now that signal, not only are we getting signals that are going to the muscles that allow you to move, but it's going to send a signal all the way down, a nervous signal all the way down here. Because in the center of our adrenal gland, we have something called the adrenal medulla. It's connected nervously to the brain. So the moment he sees that car and realizes he might die, there's a signal being sent to the adrenal medulla, or the center of the adrenal gland. It's going to give off what's called adrenaline, and that adrenaline is epinephrine. Epinephrine is a chemical signal that is going to be attached to the circulatory system, and so it's going to course through the body. So as his heart beats faster and faster and faster, epinephrine is going to flow throughout the rest of the body. Now, epinephrine is not going to go into the cells of the body. It's simply going to, if we say this is a big liver cell, it's simply going to bind to proteins on the surface of those cells. And so what's it going to do to the liver? Well, in the liver, what it's going to do is it's going to trigger a signal transduction pathway that's going to convert glycogen that's found inside the cells of the liver, and it's going to release that as glucose. Why is it doing that? Well, glucose is our energy supply, and so now glucose is going to be coursing through our body along with epinephrine, and so now we have a supply of energy, so we can quickly break down that glucose, get ATP, and we can do more out of it. But what's interesting is that epinephrine is going to go other places in the body, and it's going to have different responses depending on where it goes. And so what is epinephrine going to do to the cells that are in control of the breathing, the cells of the lung? It's going to speed up that breathing rate. What's epinephrine going to do when it goes to the cells of the heart? It's going to speed up the rate of the heartbeat. And so it's going to trigger a signal transduction pathway in the heart that's very similar to the signal transduction pathway that we find in the liver cells. However, it's going to have a different response inside the cells. It's going to not release glucose, but it's going to increase the rate of the beating of those cardiac cells. What do you think it would happen to the digestive system? Well, epinephrine's going to go there. Epinephrine's going to go there as well. But what it's going to do is it's going to vasoconstrict, so it's going to slow down digestion. And so it's going to slow down those blood vessels that feed those areas that allow us to break down and digest food, because when you're getting out of the way of a car or fighting an attacker, you don't really need to concentrate on breaking down that bagel that you ate for breakfast. So it's going to shut that down, but it's going to go to the muscles of your body and it's going to vasodilate, and so it's going to move more blood to those areas. And so our whole body is designed so we can have one signal, that epinephrine, but it can have all these different responses throughout the rest of the body. And so that's going to allow our body to respond to that threat, and that's why your heart races, you breathe faster, your pupils dilate, all that happens, and you can thank epinephrine for that. And it's that chemical response and the different either gene expression or signal transduction pathways that we have as a result. And so I hope that's helpful.
Again, these are the diseases that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention has found ACEs as undischarged traumatic stress to be the #1 factor for. And then this last list is the cultural and impact of having an ACEs score. When a percentage of the population has undischarged traumatic stress, that is the resulting from adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. ACEs bonded trauma are the #1 factor for prison inmates. ACEs bonded trauma are the #1 factor for obesity and eating disorders. ACEs bonded trauma are the #1 factor for mental health issues, all mental health. ACEs bonded trauma is the #1 factor for homelessness. ACEs bonded trauma are the #1 factor for all types of drug and alcohol addiction. ACEs bonded trauma are the #1 factor for domestic violence. ACEs bonded trauma is the #1 factor for failed marriages and ending in divorce. ACEs bonded trauma are the #1 factor for poverty and failure at life. ACEs bonded trauma are the #1 factor for dropout rates in school, the #1 factor for low teacher retention and turnover, the #1 factor with bullies in school and on the street. ACEs bonded trauma are the #1 factor for suicide in children and adults. ACEs bonded trauma are the #1 factor for adults for childhood and adult PTSD. I didn't put the health factor in there because I gave you a whole separate list for that. In America, 209 million people show signs of ACEs. That's 66%. It's time to destroy the idea that repressing emotions is a sign of strength. It is not. Repressing emotions is the #1 factor for almost every issue in this world, and we can learn how to express our emotions in a healthy manner.